Yeah, how are you? Good to see you. It's a lovely night. Good to see you. Good to see you. Good to see you. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. All good fun. I hope everyone had a good week. It is Friday night. Friday night. I'm here in my lovely Brooklyn apartment. It is nice and warm and summery outside. And I've got a couple things to chat with all of you about tonight. Just a couple things. I've got a little bit of unnamed diet beverage here with a straw. It's a little bit late, so I'm going to try not to drink too much of it. I got a little bit of it. I've actually got a paper straw that I got at a restaurant earlier tonight. Stopped at a restaurant on the way home from work, and so I have this lovely paper straw, and that's probably better, right? That probably looks better than having me gulp on here, right? If I just put the straw in my mouth, a little paper straw, right? Is that better? Tell me if it's better or not. I don't even know. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Be sure to post this wherever videos are posted. Facebook, Reddit, Twitter. Where else? Facebook, Reddit, Twitter. Oh, goodness gracious. I couldn't tell you to post it on YouTube because we're on YouTube. Instagram. Post it on your Instagram. Post it on your TikTok. Right? TikTok. Post it on your... I don't know, post it wherever videos are posted. Post it on your Telegram, right? Post it on your WeChat, right? Post it on your WeChat. I'm going to start making up, I'll make up fake social media apps. Post it on your Vizba. Post it on your Vizba. Oh, what? Are you telling me you don't have Vizba? All my friends have Vizba. I guess you all aren't as cool as me because I have Vizba, and that's where I'm posting the links. But guess you all are stuck on like Facebook and Instagram, and I have Vizba. And so I'm posting mine on my Vizba. I just made that up. Someone's going to run and copyright that right now, I swear. Someone's going to take this and they're going to run to the copyright office, and they are going to make Vizba an app, right? Well, I know where you got the name from. Oh boy. Plenty of unnamed water beverage, too. And the ice has not melted in the unnamed water beverage. So there you go. But anyway, folks, the way we do our show is that I give my opening remarks. Then from there, we do the roll call, where I call you out as I see you, names and locations, and we find out about our very international audience. It's amazing how many people watch this. And then on top of that, then afterwards, I answer your super chat questions. And that's our show. That's how we do it here. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Make sure that you hit that subscribe button because people get unsubscribed. It's not a conspiracy. It just comes from the algorithms. That's how the algorithms work. Anti-colonial struggles in the 50s and 60s on Western economies. Struggles 50s, 60s on Western economies. That's a good question. Yeah, I'll write down the super chats as they come rolling in. Does Lincoln deserve to be on the DC monument and the $5 bill? Lincoln deserve DC monument, $5 bill. That's an interesting question, right? But there you go, folks. So like I said, as the super chats come rolling in, I write them down. Then I spend the second half of the show, or speaking clearly, I spend the second half of our show. Man, I'm starting to sound like Lawrence Welk. I don't know if you guys... Okay, my grandmother, I would, after my grandfather died when I was in high school, my grandmother, she moved into assisted living in the town that I grew up in. So my senior year of high school, I would often go and visit my grandmother after school, right? On weekdays when I wasn't working at the bookstore, I would go and visit my grandmother after school, and she used to watch the Lawrence Welk show. And I told my mother that, my grandmother, she likes to watch, the Lawrence Welk show. And my mother laughed because she said that the Lawrence Welk show is what old people watched when my mom was a teenager. So it was like somehow my grandmother got old enough that she could watch the PBS reruns of the Lawrence Welk show, which was a TV show that was popular in the 70s with older folks. Direct action. What is IGN E3? I'll write it down. IGN E3. I'm glad you're spreading the message. I don't know what that is, though. IGN E3. I wrote it down, though. We'll get to it during the Super Chats. But it was a show on TV in the 70s, in the 1970s. And it was this guy who was from like Minnesota or Wisconsin, and he would walk out and he'd say, "I'm Lawrence Welk. I'm from the Lawrence Welk show, and we are going to have a show tonight." And then somebody would come out and play the piano, and there was a guy who came out, and an African-American fellow who did a tap dance, and then they had a very large man, a very, very kind of heavy-set fellow who would play the piano, and he was called Tiny Little. And I'm sure that's really fat-phobic, but that was what he was called, Tiny Little. And Tiny Little played the piano, and the African-American fellow did the tap dance. And then they had other people who did silly sketches. And then between the sketches, the Lawrence Welk show. Lawrence Welk would walk out. But anyway, I don't know why I'm thinking about that. I guess I'm thinking about that because I was tripping over my words and just starting to sound like a Lawrence Welk. But there you go. So someone tells me E3 is a big video game conference. Cool. Well, I appreciate the support. I really do appreciate the support. And I will still come back to you during the thing. You did send a super chat after all. But anyway, so enough about the Lawrence Welk show and Vizba and the hip new app called Vizba and unnamed diet beverage and all the great stuff that we're talking about. Today. Let's actually get to the opening remarks that I had intended to talk about as we get on here. So folks, I regularly read anti-imperialist media outlets, right? I mean, RT is my bread and butter. I'm at the RT studio every single day doing work. So RT, I breathe it in and I breathe it out. Right, that's RT, but, there's also the TV network I used to work with called Press TV, which is really great. Then there's a lot of great alternative news websites. You got Mint Press News. They are awesome. New Eastern Outlook. They are awesome. You got Gray Zone. They do great stuff. There's a lot of different outlets out there. But anyway, so I was looking over Press TV, right? The website of Press TV, the English language TV network from the Islamic Republic of Iran, who I've done work with over the years, and looking at their website today, and I came across a story that made me go, and I don't understand why this isn't front page news. I mean, this should be front page news, but it's not even really a big deal on Press TV. I guess they expect this in Iran at this point. And in the United States, they're not highlighting it because they're not highlighting it. But it's actually kind of an interesting story. And it's one of those stories that you won't really find anywhere else, but it's downright infuriating. Okay, so the Islamic Republic of Iran has had its voting rights in the UN General Assembly temporarily suspended. Now, that's huge, right? I mean, Iran is a member of the United Nations, just like any other. They're at the center of big debates about, the nuclear deal and whether the nuclear deal will be restored. So it's a little bit of a big deal that Iran has had its voting rights suspended at the United Nations. I mean, that's huge, right? Iran has had its voting rights suspended temporarily at the United Nations. But why has Iran had its voting rights temporarily suspended at the United Nations? Because with U.S. sanctions, they've been unable to process the fees that Iran pays to be a UN member state. Can you believe this? So the USA has put sanctions on Iran that, if you want to do a bank transfer, you can do a bank transfer with Germany, you can do a bank transfer with Sweden, you can do a bank transfer with England, But you can't do a bank transfer with Iran. They're not part of the SWIFT system, Western Union, whatever, forget it. So because of U.S. sanctions, Iran can't pay its fees to be a member of the United Nations. Its UN fees have not been paid because of U.S. sanctions. So as a result, Iran has been temporarily stripped of its voting rights in the United Nations General Assembly. Now, you want to talk about a blatant example of just straight up bullying by the United States. I mean, Iran is a sovereign country, the Islamic Republic of Iran. It is a legitimate government. It has a constitution. It has elections. It's been in power since 1979. It's a UN member state, and it participates in a number of UN bodies. But the United States has made it impossible for Iran to do a bank transfer needed to continue being in the UN. So as a result of that, Iran has temporarily had its voting rights stripped in the United Nations General Assembly. Now, if you want to talk about something that is just wrong, right? The UN should sit there and say, well, this isn't your fault, Iran. United States, stop messing with the UN. You're not allowed to do this, number one. So I'm mad at the UN for doing this. Number two, I'm mad at the United States. What in the world makes the United States think that it has the right to tell Iran it can't be a member of the UN, it can't participate? I mean, this is pretty unbelievable. Communism, anti-religion. This is pretty unbelievable, and it's particularly outrageous. And see, the United Nations is in the United States. It's in Manhattan. It's not that far from where I go to work every day. It's on First Avenue in Manhattan, Midtown. The land was donated by the Rockefeller family. Right, the Rockefellers owned a bunch of land by the river in Manhattan, and so when it was time to set up the UN, they donated the land, and the UN was set up in Manhattan, the United Nations General Assembly. And because the UN is in the United States has repeatedly used that as leverage against countries, in particular against Iran. One example that I saw, and this wasn't the Trump administration that did this, wasn't the Biden administration, this was the Obama administration. So after the Iran nuclear deal was signed, the JCPOA, right, Iran picked a new ambassador to represent them at the United Nations, right? Iran and the United States have no diplomatic relations, but the Iranians are part of the UN General Assembly, and they're a UN member state, right? CIA, Silicon Valley, destroy countries. They are part of the UN. They're allowed to have a UN mission, and so Iran picks a new ambassador to be their ambassador to the United Nations. And his name, they appointed a man named Hamid Abu Talibi. And the United States was like, PSL signs yellow. And the UN was just like, okay, this is your ambassador. And the United States was like, no, you can't have this guy. We don't like him. They wouldn't grant him a visa to enter the country. Under the UN Charter, the United States is obligated to grant visas to all UN missions and all UN representatives. But the United States didn't like Hamid Abu Talibi. They just like, we don't like this guy. No, can't do it. And I remember when this happened because I was working the UN desk for Press TV. And I was just like, are you serious? And they alleged that he had been part of the Iran hostage crisis during the 1979, the taking of the embassy. And they're like, we just don't want that guy to come in. No, you got to pick somebody else to be your ambassador. That is a complete violation of Iran's right as a sovereign country. You cannot tell Iran, you're allowed to be a member state and all of that, but, if we don't like who your ambassador is, we just don't let him into the country to be your UN ambassador. That's not okay. And again, where was the outrage? Where was the anger about this from the international community? It was just blatant. They said to the United States, the United States says to Iran, you're UN ambassador. No, can't do that. Can't do that. No. And Iran had to pick a new ambassador to the United Nations because the United States just didn't like him. Didn't like Hamid Abu Talibi. And I remember covering this, and I was just like, For real. Like, and again, like, U.S. media said barely anything about it. There were some wild situations. I mean, there was a situation a couple years before that where the UN mission of the Islamic Republic of Iran, their official UN mission, couldn't get a bank account. And if you don't have a bank account, you can't pay the rent. You can't keep your office open. And they couldn't get a bank account. And then Hillary Clinton said, you know what? They can. Hillary Clinton was Secretary of the State at the time, and she's like, well, okay, I guess we'll let you have a bank account so you can pay the rent. And it was like Iran was like having to beg for the right to have a bank account in the United States so they could keep the rent paid on their UN mission. I mean, this is like unbelievable. And again, you know, people want to make it out like the United States is just this kind country that just goes around, you know, giving out of the goodness of its heart. Give me a break. Give me a break. The Rockefellers donated the land after Robert Moses bulldozed the entire neighborhood and its industry. UN is unironically domestic imperialism. That is an interesting story, Mr. Red Illuminati. I did not know that about Robert Moses. I did know that about the Rockefellers. Didn't know that part. You know, and it's like, I mean, there's other things. I mean, these sanctions, you know, people, again, when you say sanctions, right, you say sanctions, right, you know, that, you know, sanctions sounds so, you know, I don't know, sounds so meaningless, right? It sounds harmless, right? I think there's an episode of Third Rock from the Sun, the 90s comedy show, where he's a professor, right? Norman Bethune. All right. Norman Bethune. Canada communist. And there's an episode of Third Rock from the Sun where it's like he's a college professor and he's done something to break the rules or whatever. And they're like, oh boy, you know, because you have broken the rules, you are admonished. And he's like, what does that mean? They're like, nothing. But if you continue, you'll be sanctioned. He said, what does that mean? Nothing. Well, sanctions in the international community don't mean nothing. They don't mean nothing. It means people don't get medicine. It means people don't get health care. It means in Iran they can't get airplane parts. You know, it means that that they can't get electricity in some areas. I mean, the sanctions that were put on Iraq prevented chlorine from being imported to the country, so Iraq couldn't purify its water system, and as a result, children died of preventable diseases. You know, you look at what's been done to Cuba, the criminal blockade on Cuba. And just how difficult it has made the lives of Cubans. How many Cubans have died, you know, without getting access to such things? I mean, and people don't, you know, it's just like, oh, okay. It's like, no, I mean, look how many countries the United States has placed economic sanctions on. Russia, China, Venezuela, Iran, Cuba, Nicaragua, Bolivia, Zimbabwe, Belarus, North Korea, you know, you go down the list. I mean, it's like so many countries the United States has messed with. And now we have a situation where Iran is sending ships to Cuba and to Venezuela. Right? I don't know if folks have been following this. So Iran is sending ships. We've got some ships going to Cuba and Venezuela. Okay? And the United States says, this can't happen. This is not allowed. Why not? Last time I checked, Cuba was a sovereign nation, Venezuela was a sovereign nation, and Iran was a sovereign nation. If Iran wants to send a ship to Cuba, if Cuba wants to accept a ship from Iran, if Venezuela wants to accept a ship from Iran, if Iran wants to send a ship to Venezuela, who in the world does the United States think it is to tell any of these countries that they have no right? I'm not understanding. I'm not understanding how this is any business of the United States, right? These are sovereign countries who can do business as they please. You know, the United States was loudly complaining about the fact that Iran has opened a supermarket in Venezuela, right? You know, the USA, you know, is always, you know, saying that Venezuela, oh, the people are starving because of socialism. Actually, Iran is trying to bring food and set up a supermarket in Venezuela, and the USA says, no, they can't do it. They do it anyway, right? I mean, it's like, this is such a bizarre situation where the United States is like, the United States thinks, you know, not the United States, not you, not me, but the leaders of the United States, the billionaire monopolists, think that they have the right to go around the world and tell other countries who they can do business with, who they may not do business with. I mean, this is who, they think that they can tell countries how they can participate in the United Nations. And it doesn't work that way. I mean, it just doesn't work that way. I'm sorry, but sovereign countries are sovereign countries. Look, how do you think we would be okay if the United States sent ships to, to wherever, to England, and Iran was like, no, you can't do that? Well, no, I mean, we wouldn't be okay with that. We'd be like, well, England doesn't have a problem, the United States doesn't have a problem, and thank you, Piano Man, for your super chat. We would be outraged. We'd see it as an attack on our sovereignty, right? And the United States blatantly goes around flaunting the sovereignty of countries around the world. And this is the nature of imperialism, right? I've made the analogy many times, and I will repeat it, that all roads lead to Rome. You ever hear the expression, all roads lead to Rome? This is how the Roman Empire operated. They went around the world, beating down kingdoms and forcing them to pay tribute and demanding that they be the middleman in all of their international trade. And that's why all roads led to Rome, because you could not build a road from one section of the empire to the other. All roads led back to Rome because they were the global middleman in trade. If they knew the truth, do you think most Americans would oppose the sanctions? Would most Americans oppose sanctions? And it's that simple. Now, I mean, they're about to have an election in Iran, right? A new government is going to be elected, most likely. That is taking place. People are looking at the polls, and it looks very, very good for Riazi. Riazi is the hardliner cleric who is running. Things look pretty good for him, but it ain't over till it's over. You never know. Iran is having an election. Meanwhile, we know Saudi Arabia is continuing to bombard and attack the people of Yemen and try to put down the resistance of the Yemeni people, try to keep Yemen an impoverished client state of Saudi Arabia. And the U.S. government has just imposed a number of new sanctions on the government of Yemen, on the Ansar Allah Houthi resistance forces of Yemen, and imposed sanctions on various economic entities, alleged to have a relationship with the Houthis. So this is happening. I mean, this is pretty blatant. You want to talk about U.S. imperialism? I remember when I was in school, I would say U.S. imperialism. People would say, what? When's the last time the USA took over a country? Well, there's quite a few coups, quite a few military interventions. And there's a global system of monopoly capitalism. Imperialism is not a policy. Imperialism is not a verb. It's not something you do. Imperialism is a system. Lenin wrote the very, very good book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. Imperialism is capitalism in its monopoly stage.